So why don't we get started? My name is Hillary Kane, and I am the treasurer of the Green Party of the United States, though I'm here wearing my CCC hat, and the CCC is the Coordinated Campaign Committee. I'm joined by Hart, who is one of our co-chairs of the committee. And we are excited. The honest truth is we actually started kicking around this virtual campaign school idea pre-pandemic, if you can believe that. We were thinking about the ways that we can get more training out to more people. And, you know, I think it was Aaron Fox, our former co-chair, who said, hey, we should do a virtual training. And originally we were planning to do this in April, but then Aaron actually got quite sick. Probably was COVID, though he doesn't know for sure. And so he was offline for probably close to 3 weeks battling that. And so things got a little pushed back, but luckily, you know, he's okay and we're here. And so we're excited to, you know, put together, you know, what is hopefully going to be a good introduction to running for office, though a little broader than that. A little deeper than that. And we are recording this. So, you know, if you can't make the whole 5 hours, which I certainly know is a tough slog on these Zoom calls these days, know that we will get the recording up. We will chunk it out into different modules. So the way today is going to go is that we're going to have different speakers throughout the day doing 40-minute modules. And the hope is that, you know, it'll be a good 20 to 25 minutes of presentation, and then a good, you know, 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A and discussion. You can certainly use the chat box to submit questions, to put yourself on stack when we get into Q&A mode. I will keep people muted for the most part, just to keep all of the, you know, outside chitter chatter down, because of course there's, you know, crying babies and barking dogs and sirens and yada yada going on in the background. So what I'm going to try to do, because I did this on a couple of work calls, is I'm going to put people in breakout rooms. And so what should happen on your screen is you will get invited to join a breakout room, and then you accept it. And then you'll basically be, right now we have 22 participants, and I'm going to put us into 5 breakout rooms. And you should basically be in a smaller group so that you can actually talk and get to know each other. And so introduce yourself, tell the other person, you know, who you are, where you're from, what your experience in the Green Party is, whether you're a candidate or not. And so we'll do that for, you know, 5 minutes, and then maybe we'll come back together and shuffle it up one more time and do something a little more fun. And that's about it. And then we'll really get started. So I'm going to put people in breakout rooms. I'm just going to make sure that there's nothing urgent in the chat. And separate the Pittsburgh people, says Jay. I will do my best. I only know how to do this randomly. So, you know, the computer gods will either be with us or they won't. So, all right, I'm going to put you all into 5 rooms. So 4 to 5 participants, create rooms. Open all, and then you'll get a 1-minute warning when I pull you back. All right, so you should be seeing breakouts. Good, it's working. All right, Gloria and Mel, join. Gloria, join a room, or not. You don't have to. Joseph, I'm putting you in a, okay. Hello, David. Are you coming out of the breakout?
Yeah, I got a little crossed up because I couldn't find the message that had the Zoom link until very late, and then I found myself in a breakout room, and then I was talking too long, and then other people didn't have much of a chance to introduce themselves, and so I'm back here.
Sorry.
I'll figure this thing out eventually.
We'll do this one more time, and then people get another crack at it.
Okay. I didn't know how long we even had in there, and what
You
the
know,
purpose
I will
was.
say maybe it was too short. I can give people a little longer this time.
Whoops.
Oh, sorry to cut you off.
Right in the middle of a fun conversation here.
All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shuffle the rooms again and give people one more chance to introduce themselves to get some more folks. Feel free to add some more fun stuff to your introductions, though it seems like people had plenty to talk about. You can add, like, if you've got a favorite thing that you're binging these days on TV, or if there's a favorite snack you're binging during this pandemic. So introductions, and then feel free to do the favorite snack or favorite binge watching TV show. And I'm going to open the rooms back again, and another 5 minutes for chit chat. Hi, Darlene. I can put you in a breakout room. We're doing introductions. Darlene, if you want to go in a breakout, you can introduce yourself to a small group.
Hi.
Hi.
I wasn't hearing anybody, so I was like, am I on?
Can you hear me now? You should
Yeah.
be able to accept the invitation to join
Oh, I see. Okay.
a breakout. And it's in small group introductions.
Okay, cool. Did it work?
No, you're still here.
Okay.
It's all right.
Okay, so excuse me, my dog is loose.
No, it's all right. I hear you.
Stop, get down. Can you lock her over there? Thank you. So how do we break out? You mean to tell me I can't introduce myself to you two?
I mean, you can, but I think we know you. You should have gotten some sort of message on your screen. Here, I'll try this.
And my partner Angel is coming on also shortly.
That's fine. But you should be able to see a join button, like join breakout room.
Okay, hold on. Okay, it does say, the only thing it says is invite, and that's it, nothing else.
So I don't know, accept the invitation. I can't remember what it looks like.
Okay, you want to resend it to me possibly?
All right, let's try. I'm going to try moving you to just a different room and see how that works.
Okay.
And then Mayor Powery, I'm going to put you in a breakout room and you can do small group introductions there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I see myself in there's two of us, you and Gloria, and that's it, but,
Right, because you're not in the breakout. You're still in the main
Okay.
room.
okay.
I don't know. At this point, I'm going to close them in 2 minutes anyway. So
Okay, we can hang in there. How you doing, Hillary?
I'm good hanging in there.
I know it's hard with COVID-19. We get out every once in a while shopping and for walks, and I think our state is opening up on May 18th. And
Really?
so,
Massachusetts is opening up on May? Yeah, all right.
yeah, it's a little scary, to be honest with you. So we're and the thing is, we still have high numbers.
Yeah, I know. Philly, I mean, I think rural parts of Pennsylvania might be opening up, but basically Philly is last on the list, and they were like, right now it's June 5th.
So they're opening up there by county, is what you're saying?
Well, there's like, yeah, there's like zones. There's like 3 levels, like red, yellow, and I guess green. I don't know.
So I've heard that other states are taking that approach, that they're opening up by county, but I'm not particularly sure that that's what we're doing. I think we're just opening up, you know, and they're giving us some guidelines as to how to open up, but it's still very, very scary. So we're taking all the precautions that we can. We hang out with family every once in a while. I can't resist my little grandgirls, you know, my grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I can't, they, you know, they want to see grandma, so they were,
Yeah, I know, but
yeah, they were hanging out here yesterday, but aside, and even then, you know, sometimes they go to daycare, their mother's,
really?
and their mother's an essential worker.
oh, well,
So
yeah.
so we get a little concerned, but, you know, crossing our fingers. And it's very interesting to be doing this, like running a campaign or being a part of a campaign during COVID-19. Like who would think, right, that everything is virtual campaigning these days, you know? And my first experience actually with Zoom campaigning was not positive. I don't know if you had heard that story.
I think I did hear, yeah.
Yeah, that was awful.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed for today.
But, you know, we were watching the news early this morning, myself and Angel, and they had a piece there about Zoom bombing. And there was a situation here in Salem, Massachusetts, where a church was Zoom bombed with a cross. And, you know, we was like, oh my God, we've been there, done that. So it's a little challenging, I think, to do virtual campaigning, particularly when people are not used to that level of technology. So I think this is a good training.
All right, well, hopefully folks are coming back together. The breakout rooms should be closing.
Okay.
So hopefully that worked better this time around. You got a little more time to introduce yourselves to each other. So again, I'm Hillary Kane. I am with the Coordinated Campaign Committee. We now have 25 folks on the line, which is great. So the first session that we have going is actually going to be led by me. And it's essentially, it's sort of a rehash of a webinar we've done before called Early Campaign Development. You know, I think it's a good overview of all of the basics. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put folks on mute, and we will do a Q&A part towards the end of this module. So it should run from 12:20 to 1 o'clock. And what I'm going to do is talk about some of the basics of campaigning, things that you might want to be doing in the early part of your campaign, but it's really great practice for all parts of the campaign. And knowing that some of you might be running this year, but some of you might also be thinking about runs, particularly for local office next year. Some states definitely have local office in odd years. And so it's never too early to start thinking about organizing your campaign and goal setting. And certainly since we've had, this pandemic and the coronavirus crisis, you might be readjusting your goals for the campaign and then reorganizing your campaign and thinking about things in a new light. Okay, so the overview for this module is we're going to talk about setting goals for your campaign, thinking really deeply about assessing your resources. We're going to talk about assembling a campaign team. And then if there's time, and there might not be, since this is normally a 1-hour presentation that we've condensed down, we can also touch a bit on kickoff events and a budget. But for the most part, I really want to talk about, the goal setting and some of the basics about, your campaign team and how to make sure you have the strong infrastructure in order to keep your campaign moving forward. All right, so why run for office? So this is one of those quintessential, and essential questions. And I think, many times the obvious and first answer that people have is to win, right? To actually get elected, whether it's to mayor, town council, senate, you name it. The goal, of course, is to win. And in the Green Party, we do have people who have won office. We have over 100, I think 140 some elected Greens across the country. We are definitely out to achieve political power and to implement our platform and bring it to realization through elected office. And so winning is essential. Winning is important. But it is not the only reason to run. And it's not necessarily the only reason to run in your particular race in this particular moment. And so some of the other reasons that I want to talk about are things like, improving our community, right? So things like pushing particular issues, bringing them to the forefront, making sure that the greater conversation is talking about a particular issue. And improving your community by bringing visibility to a particular issue. Another great reason, of course, is to build the Green Party. Many times Greens run for office not necessarily because they think they can win, particularly the first time out of the box, but it's really about building a foundation for future wins and future runs. And so it's about really, organizing your county level party or your state level party, depending on what office you're running for. And so just the act of running for office is an organizing tool. It's a way to bring people together. It's a way to keep people focused on a common objective, to get people in the practice of all the elements of the campaign, which can then translate over into party building pretty well. And so we sometimes see that, especially when Greens run for a higher office, like governor or senate or even president, where really one of the objectives is to actually just build the party and create more chapters, get more registered Greens, get more donors, etc. And then another one that I want to talk about, which is also important that I think is sometimes overlooked, and that's basically building name recognition for a future run. And so, I think, not that we want to emulate the current occupant of the White House, but there's a case in point of someone who ran for office a few times and failed miserably before finally winning. And for those of us who don't have reality TV shows to get our name out there, having run for office one time is actually a great way to build name recognition in your community. I know of Greens in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and we have people who have run 2 or 3 times, perhaps unsuccessfully for state senate or state representative, but they also become, in some ways a Green Party spokesperson. And so when there's a key issue in their community, the local paper might reach out and say, hey, I'm thinking of Jay Sweeney, who ran for state rep several times outside of the Scranton area. His paper will call him and say, hey, Jay, XYZ is going on. What does the Green Party think about that? And so he's become in some ways a visible representative of our party and our platform in his community, and has gained that credibility simply by running for office and putting his name out there. And so, I can't emphasize how much running a campaign in some ways is it's almost like building a small business overnight. And so like within the matter of a week, you're trying to like figure out human resources. You know, even if you're not doing payroll, you're still managing people. You're trying to figure out like, do we use this format for our meetings or this other format? How often do we do them? What's our communication plan? You're inventing a ton of stuff on the fly. And quite frankly, the first time, it's often not that great and not that well organized. And so by getting a trial run for yet a future run is often a really good reason to run for office, is to get practice, quite frankly. All right. And other reasons, I don't know if people want to share in the chat, but if there's other reasons you can think of to run for office, please put them in the chat box. And let's see what we get. Ego, David Collins. I would say that's probably not a great reason to run for office. That doesn't mean that a good candidate doesn't have a healthy amount of ego. You do have to be willing to put yourself out there and make yourself the center of attention, you know, for a good cause and not to the extreme. But, you know, wallflowers are not necessarily the greatest of candidates. And I've worked with a couple over the years who, you know, getting them to, back in normal times when you could actually go to a, you know, an event and meet and greet and shake hands, getting them to do that was like pulling teeth, and that was not helpful for our overall agenda. All right, so a little bit of SMART goals, just to make sure that folks know like the type of goal setting that I'm talking about when it comes to developing campaign goals. And those are, you know, specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-bound. And these things are all, you know, I think pretty important. I think oftentimes we see, and it's not just in the Green Party, there's plenty of places and organizations where, you know, they just make a goal like, we're gonna win. And, you know, there's no sense of like, well, what does that mean? And what does it take to get to that goal? You know, how many votes does winning mean? You know, where are those votes gonna come from? You know, break it down, be more specific. And so let's do an example of, so if your campaign's goal is to build the Green Party, here is a sample SMART goal, you know, kind of breakdown. And so the specific thing, so maybe like, how do you know if you've built the Green Party? I mean, like, that's the fundamental question. You know, if your goal is anything other than winning or in addition to winning, how are you gonna know if you've actually achieved it? Is it just a feeling? Well, let's hope that it's a little bit more than that. And so in this case, the example might be growing the membership and local infrastructure. So I can imagine I'm a statewide candidate and my goal, and I will know if I have built the Green Party by the end of my campaign, if the number of registered Greens or the number of members, depending on the kind of party, you know, registration or not that you have in your state, has grown by 20%, whatever. You know, the number is, I don't want to say the number is irrelevant, but, you know, the whole point is to simply have a target. Our membership is at this level now, and we want to get it to this level in the future. Another way of measuring the growth in your party might be local infrastructure. So right now we have 7 local county chapters across the state, and we want to double that by the end of the year. And so our goal as a campaign is going to be to try to organize new chapters in 7 more counties that didn't have them before. So that's the type of specific goal setting that I'm talking about. You know, the measurable piece, right? So again, right, coming up with the numbers behind the concepts. Again, whether it's new county chapters, number of new members, it could be absolute targets, it could be percentages. New donors is another way to think about growth. New volunteer signups, all the growing your mailing list, all of that type of stuff. You want it to be attainable, right? You know, like, don't just make up stuff out of thin air, right? You know, what's the track record? How does this compare with the last time we ran someone for state office? You know, are you gonna just simply double your membership overnight? Because that sounds like a, you know, really, I mean, like doubling, that sounds great, but is that really possible? And so really think about what your resources are and, you know, the time you have and what is gonna be meaningful and significant and a stretch goal but not necessarily something that's so, you know, unreachable and unattainable that it just demoralizes folks in the long run. You know, results oriented. So like, why is it that we want to grow? Well, of course, it's to build a base of power so we can compete in future elections. And so again, really thinking about what's the ultimate end goal that I'm trying to achieve, and then what are the different means to that end. And so really sort of, I think, situating that goal for growth, not growth for the sake of growth, but, you know, a particular kind of growth. Growth maybe in folks who you know are going to turn out for future mobilizations, or who are going to support our platform and our agenda, so that we're building the power base to get the achievement and the victories that we want. And then the time, like, when is this going to happen? And so, you know, an answer, of course, for, you know, a campaign related thing might be election day, though it might be a little bit beyond that, because hopefully there's some debriefing and there's some, you know, wrap up events. And so it might simply be just the end of this calendar year. But this is an example of the type of, you know, smart goal setting for a campaign that's really focused on building the party. And then if you want to, of course, do the winning for office one, that's going to look a little different. And so, you know, that specific goal is, I'm going to win county commissioner, for example. And that requires, you know, 50 plus 1%, 51% of the vote, or 50% plus 1 is really how I should write this. And we're going to estimate this in our fictional, you know, case here as 5,500 votes. And so really thinking about, again, what is that specific and measurable objective? Like, you don't necessarily need to get everyone to vote for you. You just need to get enough people to vote for you. And how much is that, of course, is the trick to figuring it out. But that's really what, you know, some of this is about. And is this attainable, right? So if the previous Green got 3,000 votes, you know, why do we think we're going to get 5,500? And given that that's almost double, what are we going to do differently in order to achieve that more significant win? And is that possible? Is this a realistic goal? Of course, what's the reason? And that's the purpose of implementing the Green Party platform at the county level. And of course, there could be a more specific, you know, policy initiative that you're trying to win. And then again, the time, you know, in this case, for sure, is by election day. Because you can't obviously achieve this goal slightly later, and you know, it's you know, baked into the system. So these are some examples of goal setting, both for two different types, or I guess sort of, you know, implementing a goal for two types of, you know, two different types of campaigns. And I think this is really important to think about, because in the heat of the moment, in the midst of your campaign, you're going to have limited resources. You're not going to have all the money in the world, or all the time in the world, or all the people in the world. And you're going to have to make decisions. Do we invest in this strategy or that strategy? Do we pay for radio advertising or door knocking, if that we can get back to that? You know, do we pay for a targeted strategy in this one neighborhood, or do we try to blast our information citywide? And to some degree, if you go back to your original goal and what you're trying to accomplish, it should help you figure out which way you should go. Because one way might be more likely to translate into, in some cases, a short-term win of getting the votes in the here and now. But another strategy might be a longer-term investment for the party that might lead to party building in the long term, but may not necessarily get you the most reliable votes for this current cycle. And I think that's something that we all need to really keep in mind, that there is often this tension and this short-term, long-term that we really need to balance, particularly as a growing party. All right, so let's talk a little bit about assessing your resources. You know, it's not just money. It's also, you know, I mean, money, of course, is a big thing, but it's, you know, human resources. And that, you know, for most of us is volunteers. You know, we don't usually have tons of money to pay for staff. Though sometimes, you know, that's small stipends, that's token support here and there. But, you know, volunteers are a human resource, and they need to be managed effectively, just like any other resource. You know, your infrastructure is also a resource. Do you have existing databases from perhaps your local or your state party? Your own personal contact list? You know, do you have people that you can reach from the beginning? Do you understand different processes? Do you know how to build a website, contact the media, you know, et cetera? You know, cut turf is another term where you're sort of looking at a map and thinking about, you know, where voters are. And again, you know, there are people out there who already know these things that you want to tap into. There's obviously lovely trainings like this one to learn these things. And of course, there's your own experience. Having done this before, it helps you be better able to do it the next time around. And certainly technology. Do you have websites ready to go? Do you know how to do those things? So infrastructure is super important. And then relationships, you know, who do you know in the community? Who are those allied groups that will possibly endorse your campaign and provide you with some of these other things, whether it's financial resources or human resources? And so, you know, really do an honest assessment of what materials and relationships and people that you have at your disposal, and really think, does this map, like, am I going to be able to get to my goals with what I have? And if the answer is no, then that's that's where you need to grow. That's where you need to put the most time and effort in using your campaign to sort of to grow. Lynn Serpy, who is a longtime Green Party campaign manager and organizer, taught me years ago, you know, like the name of the game is build your base, retain your base, build your base, retain your base. And so you're constantly in this, you know, and that's as a party and also as a campaign of sort of, you know, bringing people into your tent, but keeping them as well. And it's really about effectively managing those resources, those human volunteers, donors, staff, etc. All right, I think we only have a few more slides to go, and then I'm going to open it up for some discussion. So the other, I think, key considerations when running for office, you know, again, it's comparing your resources with the need. And so, you know, what does it take to actually win a local or statewide race in your community in terms of dollars, volunteers, et cetera? You know, is there an open seat, or are you running against an incumbent? How much money is being spent by other parties? So those are things to think about to give yourself, I think, a more realistic sense of what your chances are and what you might need to do really differently in order to break out and to sort of, you know, get people's attention, particularly in a time like now where, you know, the election is almost just like in the background, right? I mean, we've got states who have canceled whole primaries, for God's sakes. You know, it's just not what people are thinking about right now. They're thinking about their most immediate pressing economic concerns, this health and safety of their loved ones. You know, it's a very strange time to be campaigning, but at the same time, there's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot for those of us as Greens to point at the status quo and say, like, this really, really isn't working, folks. We definitely need something new and different. And then in your own community, what is the specific context? You know, what are the hot issues in your neighborhood, in your city, in your state? You know, the trends, what are people talking about, what's going on? You know, are things leaning one way or leaning another way? And what kind of time do you have? If you're starting your campaign now and it's May 9th, you know, to some degree, that's kind of late in the game to start, you know, even a small local race, right? It's not too late officially, but it's pretty late. And so what you might do and how you might approach a campaign that's only going to run for 4 or 5 months is very different than if you had basically been planning and thinking about this a year ago. And so, you know, you also have to set expectations and do some goal setting, you know, based on the time that you have. And it's not just the time you have now until election day, but also the time you can give. Like, do you have 5 hours a week to devote to this, or 35 hours a week to devote to this? Some people might be sitting on more time on their hands right now if they're out of work or their work is sort of, you know, pulled back a bit, which could be great in terms of investing that extra time into their race and into party building. All right. And I get, the other thing I want to talk about before I open it up is assembling a campaign team. And, you don't necessarily have to have somebody in all of these roles immediately, but this is sort of something to strive for. Again, this doesn't have to be paid staff. These can be lead volunteers, but you really want to have someone in charge of all of these things. And I put these on here in a particular order. Treasurer, and I'm not just saying this because I am a treasurer and I'm biased, but treasurers are one of the most important roles on your campaign. For the most part, it's one of the few legally required things that you have to have in terms of, roles. I do know of candidates that have served as their own treasurer in practice, but somebody else's name needs to be on that paperwork. And I have talked to, unfortunately, far too many candidates who have said, I'm basically ready to go. I just can't find a treasurer. And, that's a real shame because it's not that hard. You just need a detail-oriented person who can balance a checkbook and you're good to go. But it is an important role. The next thing is really a campaign manager, and that, you don't necessarily have to use that title, but who is your go-to person that's going to help you do this thing? You cannot do it by yourself if you're going to do it effectively. In the beginning, the campaign manager will be the de facto everything else. Like they will be coordinating volunteers. They will be helping with fundraising, media, technology, all of these other things. And then if they're doing their job right, they're going to bring in enough volunteers and other people to sort of start delegating some of these other things onto other people. The campaign manager is really about, making sure all the trains run on time and that the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. That people who say, I'm going to get XYZ done next week, that a week later you follow up and say, okay, you said you were going to reach out to 3 media outlets. How did that go? That's really what the campaign manager does, is keeps everyone focused and working on the campaign. And so things that I really, find to be hugely important is having a regular campaign meeting. And so that's like your inner circle, and again, it could start off with just you, your treasurer, your campaign manager, then it, maybe a couple key leaders from your local Green Party. Start with who you've got, and then as it goes, expand a little bit. I mean, it's not at some point that you want 40 people on your campaign team. You want 40 or more people on your campaign, but you're talking, this is like the steering committee, the inner circle who's going to make sensitive decisions and help you and be your sounding board. And that group should really be meeting at least once a week, checking in with each other. How are we doing with media? How are we doing with fundraising? How are we doing with volunteers? What's the next thing that we need to do? And, I'm a big fan. I know this is like, heresy in some circles. I'm a big fan of meeting for the sake of meeting, because in my world, it forces me to actually get that thing done. If I have a regular standing meeting on Tuesday afternoons, and last Tuesday I promised to do X, by Monday, I'm like, oh, did I get that done? Whereas if you only check in when you think there's something to talk about, I can pretty much guarantee that there's gonna be almost nothing to talk about because you're not actively working on the campaign. And so, pre-COVID, Green Party members were all over, Zoom and free conference call and all these web-based tools to connect. And certainly we now almost all have experience with these things. These are the tools that help you have those campaign meetings, especially in statewide campaigns where your team might be all over the state. You might be pulling in, green expertise and others from other parts of the country. Even now, if you've got a local race and you can't physically meet in person, this is the next best thing. So, have an agenda, have a regular set time frame, and have a meeting and figure out what you're gonna do. And then next time, did it happen? How did it go? What's the next thing that we're gonna do? And so, and then at some point you'll start hopefully building out all of these other roles on the campaign. So here, this is my parting slide. So if I were at this moment starting to run for office, these are the top 5 things that I would be thinking about. Making sure I have a campaign website up with an active donation page. And we're gonna have a session later today on campaign websites. making sure that you're on the ballot, whatever that looks like in your state, and every state does it differently, so I'm not going to get into that. You're going to call everyone you know to raise money. So this is the tool. This is you go into your contacts list and you call at least 100 people, if not every single person in your phone, and you ask those 100 people for $100 each. Everyone's not going to give you $100. Some people are only going to give you 10. Some people are going to give you nothing. But most people, even if they're the most right-wing people who just hate every political position you have, chances are, if they're in your phone, you know them for some reason. Maybe they cut your hair. Maybe they cut your grass. Maybe they, have, their kids are in your kids' daycare. They have a personal relationship with you. And if you ask them for money, chances are they're going to give you something. And so imagine if 100 people gave you $100 each, that would be $10,000. That's not nothing. You have to have goals. I mean, obviously that's what I talked about, whether it's, votes or party building or a little bit of both. What is the outreach strategy that you're going to use, and how is that driven by your goals? And then the last thing I think is that are in my top 5 is media. How am I going to put myself out there, whether it's earned media, social media? The world needs to know that I exist, or I'm certainly not going to be able to get to the goals that I want. So I think I'm going to wrap it up here. It is 12:46, which gives us just under 15 minutes for Q&A. And so I'm going to take everyone off mute here. And I see we now have 34 people, which is exciting. I might have to mute folks if there's background noise, so try to police your own sound if you can. But yeah, now is the time. If you people have questions, comments, again, you can put yourself on stack in the chat. Let's open up the floor. And of course, if people have lived experience with any of this stuff, feel free to also do some storytelling as well.
Yeah. One of the things we try to stress when we orient candidates in Texas is the Ethics Commission requirements, financial reporting. And we can't stress enough how important that is, because if all your P's and Q's aren't dotted and crossed, then you're subject to 4- and 5-digit fines.
For sure.
I don't know if it's the same elsewhere, but it's hugely important that treasurer has a certain amount of responsibility, but the candidate is ultimately responsible for making sure that the forms get in on the times they are required.
Yeah, I mean, that's another important reason that treasurers are important. When I said find a detail-oriented person, I meant it. Because those fines can be real. It's not just about making sure checks get written and money gets deposited, but that it also gets tracked effectively and correctly for campaign finance purposes. So that is definitely that's why, treasurer is number 1 on my list, because there's legal and compliance. You can pretty much get away with, winging everything else yourself, but not this. And then to answer a couple people's questions is, will the slides be available? Yes, we can make those available. We're also recording, so know that as well. Somebody asked, is it worth it to hire someone to be a treasurer if you can't find someone? Perhaps yes. It is such a key role. And so again, in many cases, treasurer can be just a name on a piece of paper. The person, and same for, campaign manager. Sometimes it's a symbolic, thing of like, oh, look at this leader in our community who's our campaign manager, but they're not really actually doing tons of work. That is possible. I would say, if you can find someone with an accounting background, that's great. But yes, and Jay says that they're in Pittsburgh, they're trying to build a treasurer pipeline. Love it. I would love to see that happen at the national level, because one day I would like to step down from this role. Not yet, maybe, but we definitely need more talent in the pipeline, because, it is a kind of, niche thing, but it's an important role. And for the, I do have a campaign treasurer training that I'm not necessarily going to do today unless we're just really, really ahead of schedule. But I'm also happy to do it, you know, on demand at any time for a state or local party. I'm happy to do one-on-one coaching, you know, with a campaign treasurer or a state and local party treasurer. We've also created a treasurers network that meets once a quarter. So we're definitely, as a national party, really trying to invest, you know, not just in campaign training across the board, but specifically in treasurers.
So we could potentially find someone and then have them go through that training with you if we were running. Okay, and my question is there, another question, is there conflict of interest? Should we make sure that it's someone who's not like related to us in some way, or is there anything legally in terms of that we should be really wary of?
That's a good question, and the answer is I don't know. I mean, I think what I'm more interested, like for me, conflict of interest is less about my cousin or my husband is my treasurer, but more of just like, are there clear policies in place about where money is going? I think sometimes people get tripped up because what seems reasonable in like a small dollar and close relationship kind of situation can maybe then seem unreasonable. You know, my joke is like, if you add 4 zeros and say that the Democrats did it, does it pass the smell test? And if the answer is no, then you shouldn't be doing it either. And so, like an example, you know, I remember we ran someone here in Philly a few years ago who, you know, was low income, had, you know, had very little income in the first place, but was running for state representative and had a house, was basically living on the second floor of a storefront corner property. And he wanted to use the first floor as the campaign office, and he wanted the campaign to pay him rent for the use of that office. And on the one hand, you know, you could say that's completely legitimate, right? Like the campaign is its own legal entity. He is a separate entity financially. Like the campaign is getting something of value, probably at below market rent. You know, like there, you could sort of make this seem really like on the up and up. But at the same time, like it doesn't look and feel right. Like, are you running for office just to raise money to then funnel it back into your own pocket? And again, you know, and I mean, you know, might have been like $100 a month, right? Like really small amounts of money. But again, if you add 4 zeros and say like, you know, oh, the Hillary Clinton campaign is renting, you know, an office from her own, you know, from Bill Clinton's, you know, building in Harlem, then you start to like, really? That doesn't sound right. And so, you know, I think that's really more what I'm concerned about, is making sure people have really good, you know, sort of ethics and not in a, you know, again, it's sometimes not obvious, but, you know, to really like, how does this look to the outside public? And as Greens, I think we really have to hold ourselves to a standard that's almost higher than the norm, because we are the ones also, you know, always decrying, you know, corporate money in politics and big money in politics and the corruption. And so we really have to be holier than thou, because if not, you know, we don't really have a leg to stand on in terms of our critique. So great question. All right, let's see what else is in the chat here. Yes, Donald Trump is not our metric for what for what appropriate campaign finance looks like. And then I guess the other thing I will say is that it also varies by state of what's, and jurisdiction, about what's allowable and not allowable. And so I know, and some of it, you know, is really a social justice issue. So for example, you know, I was Sherry Konkala's campaign treasurer. Both times she ran, well, 2 times she ran for office locally. When she ran for sheriff, which was the city of Philadelphia office, and when she ran for state representative. And on, I can't remember which it was, but with one of them, we could use campaign resources. I don't want to say to pay her a salary, because we never did that, but we could use campaign resources to pay for things that might have seemed personal. And as a working woman, you know, things like childcare is a real legit expense. Things like, you know, wardrobe, right? But in the other jurisdiction, it wasn't allowed. And so sometimes, you know, it really is also based on your own jurisdiction and what's allowable. All right, any other questions or comments? And we're about 5 minutes from the next topic. So if we also end a couple minutes early, that's not bad. It'll give us a little transition.
This is Travis Crystal.
Another treasurer, shout out, yay.
I'm the treasurer for the Hawkins Walker presidential campaign and also for the Green Party of Texas. And I would second what Hillary is talking about, about the needing to be holier than thou, not just because we, Greens basically have like the moral high ground on every single issue, but also because, especially when we are running serious campaigns that are a real threat, we invariably are going to attract like agent provocateurs and fake scandal mongering. So that's why you have to be super erring on the side of not doing anything that could be misconstrued disingenuously into being like seeming like a scandal. And then the other thing I would add is like probably the most important principle that I'm aware of when it comes to, is this an eligible expenditure? Are we allowed to use campaign funds for this? There's like the golden rule is basically, and this is from the FEC, it's this idea of, hypothetically, if you were not running for office, would you still incur this expenditure? So, that's like, you can't just use the campaign funds to pay for all of your regular bills that you would already be incurring just as a normal person if you weren't running for office. So it has to be, the expenditures have to be, you got to be spending the money on things that, like, the fact that you're running for office is causing you to incur that expenditure. And yeah, child care, that example, that's certainly explainable, because it's like the fact that I'm running for office is causing me to require the child care, stuff like that.
Exactly. No, I think that's a great point, and I think that's a really good way to frame it. All right, so it's 12:58. I see Felena has raised her hand. I'm going to give her the last word. Another treasurer. Shout out to all the treasurers out there. Felena, go right ahead. Hopefully you're not muted.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, the last thing I wanted to mention about the treasurer, so I don't have to mention it on my segment, is on the website and the donation page. Make sure that the treasurer and whoever's developing the page has the proper disclaimer at the bottom of your donation page that matches the state's or the local's term and conditions, whether it's the certain limit of how much you can donate, who can donate, even though people usually don't read all that stuff at the bottom, or if you make it into a checkbox, you still, for your own legal protection, you should still put a disclaimer at the bottom of your donation page. And that's all I wanted to add to make sure. I know a lot of people don't pay attention or don't think that stuff is important, but that's how you'll get caught up. So.
For sure. All right, so I think we're going to end on that note because we are at time, and